The day has finally come here at Tech Yes City where I'm going to be changing my main system over from Intel to AMD. More specifically, I'm going from the i9 10850K, which I've custom tuned in a mini ITX rig, and I'm going to the Ryzen 9 9950X, which I've also finished custom tuning, but we are going to, in today's video, kind of like a vlog, take you through all the manual settings that I do in the BIOS to make this thing as responsive as possible. And believe me, there's probably going to be a different kind of tune that you're not used to seeing on Ryzen 7000 or 9000 series CPUs. It's a very unique tune and way of doing things that I personally love, and in the end, I feel like it's the most responsive way to use AMD Ryzen CPUs, at least 7000 and 9000 series CPUs. However, after all that, I am going to start editing the first part of this video and give you guys my first impressions on how this compares to my older system. Now, you may think, oh, Brian, your older system's a few years old now. It's the 10th gen i9. And you may go, Brian, it's going to be a complete wash. The Ryzen CPU is going to poop all over the i9 10th gen. This is the thing, we're not going to be testing gaming FPS in today's videos. I'm not interested in the FPS figure that comes out in a game. What I'm interested in is the general desktop usage when I'm doing things like editing videos, dragging and dropping files, as well as listening to music at the same time, opening things up, and having to do a few different tasks at one time. I found in the past for me, 13th and 14th gen Intel CPUs were actually worse than the 10th gen CPUs for my particular workload. And this is where I want to test out the 9950X and give you guys my experience where I'm taking it through a different kind of test drive. Instead of just going straight down the line and testing for maximum acceleration and speed, I want to take this thing through the track and test how it goes around the corners. If there's any drift or if there's any front wheel drive torque steer, I want to know these kinds of things and report that back to you guys, because a lot of you guys enjoy these kinds of vlogs because no one really talks about these things, and I think it's important, especially if you're buying a flagship CPU like a Ryzen 9 9950X. Now also, since this is a fresh build, we do have a new motherboard here and we need to activate Windows. Later in the video, we'll show you this process too, where you can get a cheap Windows 11 or Windows 10 key, activate that using a coupon code and link below, but more on that later. Let's take a look at the build quickly, and here is where we've got the Flux Pro from Antec. They did send this in, they did want me to take a look at this case, and I thought lately Antec have just been hitting home runs when it comes to their cases, and I thought, okay, we're going to use an Antec case in my main system now because I've been thoroughly impressed with the previous cases that have come through here at Tech Yes City. And this one, I've already finished the testing on it. I can tell you guys, it is a solid case. Not just in terms of building it and the build quality, but also in terms of the temperatures. Here's where we've got the CPU cooler with our custom tune here, 5.25 gigahertz with the Cinebench R23 run, all 16 cores, at 1.21 volts, and we actually did the side panel off first. After 10 minutes of Cinebench R23, we got 44,000 points and a max temperature of 83 degrees, and then we tested it with the side panel on, and here's where we got 45,000 points and a max temperature of around 82 degrees. So the case did lower the CPU temperatures by 1 degree, which means that airflow in this case is really good, but also in this particular example, it's going to lift the performance a little bit because of those better temperatures. Though also some other things that Antec have done really well is the CPU and GPU temperature readout on the side there. You only have to open up the program once and set it up. After that, you don't need any programs minimized in the bottom right-hand corner of your screen. And so it's going to pretty much not impact the performance of your desktop machine, which I am very OCD about what programs I install on my main system, even if they're little lightweight programs, which we'll get onto in a sec with the water cooler. But Antec have done a good job here in making sure that it's got the lightest weight impact on your system with the temperature readout on the GPU and CPU on the side. But when it comes to checking out a case, I also do look at the GPU temperatures, and here's where they were slightly worse with the side panel on. And this is a very hard thing to pull off in terms of getting either temperatures exactly the same or lower when it comes to having a side panel on, because we got a open blower design here versus say a reference design, and this one just essentially dumps heat in the case. And so with the glass panel off, it's going to be able to dump it out the side as well. So the CPU temperatures and performance amazing in the Flux Pro, but the GPU temperatures were ever so slightly behind with that side panel on. So overall, could not have picked a better case for my main system. I believe Gamers Nexus also reviewed this case, and they said that it was phenomenal and it did very well on their benchmark scores. However, there is one thing I will critique, and one thing that sort of was a little bit annoying, I thought, was that you've got this shift bracket included here, which is for these new shift style power supplies. So that's an extra that's included, but then the fans themselves are not RGB. They're just simple PWM fans. And I thought that was kind of a missed opportunity because they've got the, literally at the back of the case, they've got the RGB controller installed with the spare slots there. So I'd like to see them go away with this kind of thing and spending money here, and someone's buying the Flux Pro, they're paying for this, and then they're not getting the ARGB, which I do like having the fans just set to a static red or a static green. I think it's very pleasant, especially at nighttime with the static red. I have over the years struck a balance between RGB and non-RGB, but in this case, it's literally not there. So if you look closer inside this case, you may notice there's this big chunky cooler on top of the CPU. And this is a weird story where at Computex, there was a company called Tryx, and they asked me to take a look at their water coolers, which is really weird because I came to their booth to check out their mini ITX systems. But then they asked me, look, we're gonna send you over this water cooler, check it out for us, and tell us what you think. And I thought, okay, well, I'm gonna tell the viewers at the same time what I think. And here's where I've got mixed opinions about this cooler. For starters, the performance. The most important thing with the water cooler is actually really good. This is the first prefab water cooler that I've seen beat out the Arctic 420. And this is only a 360 mil, and it's come in with a score that's about 2 degrees better. So at these same settings with this Ryzen 9950X, I managed to get 85 degrees on the Arctic. This one's getting 83 degrees in a similar testing scenario. This is actually a really good score for the Tryx cooler, and I think they're using the latest 8th generation Antec water cooler pump. Now here's where we start to move into that mixed territory, and that is, first of all, the price. This is a $350 US cooler, and then if you're in Australia, it's over $5,000. I never thought I'd see the day where all-in-ones become this expensive. But for that price, they do include their panoramic OLED display, but that is customizable. As we can see here, we have changed the screen. We have put the CPU, GPU, and memory utilization figures up on the screen to monitor those, especially if I'm video editing. I can quickly check those out. But the problem here is I have to install a program and have that program running if I want to have this set up. Without that, it's just a simple Tryx logo there. And I don't like, as we said before, having services running when I don't need to. So I would have liked to have Tryx maybe put on some kind of video memory and have a lightweight service to fix that and have it running better. As well as having a cheaper option available in the market with no OLED display at all and just the basic cooler, because it does perform really nice. But the final thing about this cooler was when I was installing it, I actually got on video on the AM5 platform here, there was this big snap that didn't sound good. I'll let you guys take a quick listen. And this actually happened twice when I was installing the cooler. So kind of like, as I think Gamers Nexus did check out the case from Tryx, and they had some build quality concerns. The cooler, I think that would be a build quality concern, as well as when I was using the software, it did bug out with the mirror mode, and it thought mirror mode was off when it was still on. And so there's definitely some room there for improvements, but at least the cooler performance itself is top notch. So now we're moving over to the computer in the BIOS here, where we've done a tune on this system, as you'll already see with the 32 gigabytes and 32 gigabytes, 64 gigabytes in total at 6200 megahertz. So what we're using for the memory here is a G.Skill kit of, it's a 64 gigabyte kit of CL3036. And this stuff is really good memory. G.Skill make some of the best timings as well as binning on DDR5 that I've seen, especially for AMD Ryzen. And this kit here, we manage, even though it's a 6000 kit, I do manage to find that a lot of the G.Skill kits at 6000 do get that extra 6200 megahertz bump, at 2067. And this is on a 64GB kit, which is actually really impressive. And everything's, at least when I was tuning Windows before and setting things up and doing the testing on the case, everything seemed stable from that side of things. Now, the final component here, the main thing is, I do some other tweaks as well, like disabling security device support and disabling the FTPM. But the main thing here, the last thing, is to go to the manual CPU overclocking here. And you'll notice I've set in just a static frequency of 5.25 gigahertz, or in this case, it's 5,250 megahertz. And the CPU voltage is then all in millivolts, and so that means it's 1.21 volt. Now you're probably thinking, Brian, this is gonna run your CPU at these speeds all the time. And actually it does. And so this is where it gets a little bit weird, because with this tune, essentially, you've got the static voltage, the static CPU frequency, but what you've got is also the amps then being the only factor left that determines how much power output is being used. So in this case, what happens is, I find it's really responsive on the desktop, and if we're not using any power, it then just ramps down. The power from the wall actually does ramp down in accordance with that, but it's just so responsive. It's a 5.25 gigahertz already there, ready to rock and roll when it needs the power. And so you're just saving that little bit of delay when you're using your CPU. I've actually set up my i9 in a similar fashion. And so I love it that ASRock boards can do this so easily, and the power savings are still there on an idle desktop. Then the last thing is the security. I do like to turn off secure boot, but also I do have CSM disabled, and then we have resizable bar enabled. So that's our BIOS tune. Let's get into Windows though, and talk about, I guess, some of the most unique things I do in terms of weird sort of settings that I do turn on and off in terms of tuning Windows 10. So now that we're in Windows, what I like to do if I do something like this is I like to double check that everything is working absolutely fine. And here's where we're in the idle desktop. We've got hardware info. Before we were doing the benchmarks to check if that 5.25 gigahertz was running right. And as you can see with the 45,000 point score, it was certainly kicking some tail. But what we've got right here is an idle state, and you will still see it's 5.25 gigahertz. So it's just doing that all day, every day, just sitting there. And it's only using, the minimum draw there was 34 watts roughly. So it's working as intended, and the idle power consumption isn't too bad in this particular state, especially for a 9950X. We've also got the confirmation of the RAM is working absolutely fine there, and our Infinity Fabric is 2067. So at that nice little ratio there of the 3:2 ratio, which is one of the best ratios with the AM5 platform. So do keep that in mind. That's kind of a ratio that you should try to aim for in terms of getting the best performance, not just in FPS in games, but also in terms of latency and desktop usage on this particular platform. Now, another thing is too, I'm going to quickly run a benchmark on the ASSSD for the 2 terabyte drive. And that's where we've got the Gen 5 drive in here. And these do need some serious cooling, but it's the crucial 2 terabyte that they did send us over a while ago. And I'm finally getting to the stage where I can use it and take advantage of it, because my Intel i9 system, that actually is only using a Gen 3 drive, a 2 terabyte Gen 3 drive. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna move over now to the main setup where I'm gonna have this whole system. I'm gonna start editing out this first portion of the video. But before then, there are some tweaks that I have enabled in Windows 10 here. So besides the standard services of disabling distributed link tracking client, as well as connected user experiences and telemetry, I also do turn off some of the fancy graphics settings, as well as making sure core isolation's turned off and uninstalling all these apps and programs that I just never use. I also make sure system restore is disabled. My hard drive's trim setting, the service for that is turned off. And the final thing is the power profiles. And here's where I download Power Settings Explorer, and then I unlock some extra hidden features, and I disable the secondary NVMe timeout, as well as loosening up the processor idle time check. I found those two settings are pretty good in terms of improving just general desktop usage too. Though since this is a new motherboard, here's where today's video sponsor comes into the equation, VIP SCD keys. If you've got this annoying Windows is not activated message which in this case, since it's a new build, we are on a little bit of a grace period here. It will start showing up with that annoying activate windows very soon, but we can avoid all that. And instead of going and paying $200 for a Windows 11 or Windows 10 Pro key, we can just go to the link in the description below and then type in the coupon code TYC, and you'll get yourself a sweet 30% discount on the price there. And then once we've paid for that, which they've got different payment methods, like for instance, your typical Visa or MasterCard, or you've got PayPal, which I personally use PayPal for SCD keys when I'm getting keys. I then buy that key, and then straight away I get the activation code. I can then just copy paste that in directly into this change product key button here by left clicking that, putting that code in, and then I'm good to go, clicking next and then next again, and then Windows will be activated. Now also they've got a similar deal going on if you're using Windows 11, which I personally still prefer Windows 10, even though there's roughly a year left of official support. I'm gonna figure it out in a year's time because I personally don't like Windows 11. I just find it's more sluggish in general. There's more telemetry baked in, and there was just more problems in general, especially with the Ryzen 9000 series when I was testing that for benchmarking. But if you want to get Windows 11, you can get Windows 11 Pro activated for as little as $21 if you use that coupon code TYC. And again, just like Windows 10, the activation process is super easy. Just select your method of payment, get that code, drop it in, select activate, and you're good to go. Then with all that aside, let's take this PC over finally and to the other setup, the TIE Fighter setup, and we are going to now start editing out this video, and then we'll come back mid-video and talk about the first impressions of closing off with the 9950X and telling you guys about the responsiveness of this build. Do that. You may stop and you may laugh and you is going to poop all over the i9 10th gen. This will be a complete wash. The right older system. Now, you may think, oh, Brian, your older system, a few years old now. It's the 10th gen i9. Though systems of So we're now at the next morning. I did start editing late into the night with the 16 core, the 9950X, and overall net positive experience. Even though in that B-roll footage you saw there was a little bit of a hitching, we'll talk about that very soon. But let's talk about the overall experience while editing on this PC. It was very good. It was the best video editing experience I've had on an AMD Ryzen CPU, bar none. It was really snappy, really responsive. I felt in certain areas it did a better job than the i9, especially in terms of just raw scrolling. I mean, some of that may have to do with the Gen 5 drive, certainly, but overall it was a beast in terms of getting this whole project done. Very impressed with what we're seeing so far. However, there were some nuances, and there were some things that I'm going to look into more, and this is why I have to test it over a few months. But ultimately so far, I'm not gonna rage quit on this setup. Other setups in the past, I have rage quit, and I have, like even after a few days on it, I've just left because it was just either so laggy or it was just unbearable. And I had that, for instance, on my 13th gen. I just couldn't stand it after going back and forth between the i9 setup and then the 13th gen. That was when I tried a different i9 13900K. So I ended up rage quitting that second trial of the 13900K and going back to the i9 when I tried that, the 10850K. But this time around, there's definitely no rage quitting. That's my first impressions. It's really good. It does some things better than the 10th gen i9, but then there's some little nuances, and I'm going to, over the next few months, work on them, as well as, and this is a big thing for me personally, I'm also gonna try an 8-core. Whether it's a 9700X or a 9800X3D, I'm actually gonna be trying those as well after a couple of weeks. I'm gonna put in just the 8-core and see if the single CCD can perform better than the 16 core. And this is one thing that I did notice when I was video editing. I started just to set the camera up over a long time and just monitor the CPU usage for what I do. And here's where it wasn't really that CPU intensive in terms of just maxing out all the cores and threads. So it's definitely, in this scenario, I need more of a faster in terms of response time CPU than anything. I need something that's low latency. And that's the biggest important thing for my workflow. And what I'm showing you guys in today's video with this workflow is the majority of my work. This is where I spend the most time, is snipping and snapping videos together and ultimately making the final product that you see on the screen here. So for me, it's important to have something that is the fastest in doing this general usage and alt tabbing and just power using on the desktop is what I'd call it. But also there's no real benchmarks for it. And in fact, going forward, I'd love to see some sort of GUI sort of benchmark, GUI, where it's like graphical user interface interaction. I think that's the best way to describe it, where if we got something like that, it'd be an actually really good benchmark going forward. And so there's just really no information out there on these kinds of things and which CPU is best for this. But anyhow, my experiences, I'm just reporting on it. Overall, it is a really good experience for AMD. I think if you are going to get into heavy work, then look at what CPU you really need in terms of CPU utilization, as well as memory utilization and GPU utilization, of course, and then try and find the best balance for you. And I think the 8-core may be what a lot of people actually need, even though they think they may need a 16-core. I've definitely noticed over the years, video editing software has become much more GPU focused. So you really want to get the right GPU for the right job. And this is why in the past I've also said with the 4070 Ti that it's a really good GPU because it's got very similar decoding and encoding abilities to the 4080 and 4090, which are a lot more expensive. And so when I noticed when I was doing a lot of this work, the video decode portion of the GPU, that was like near 100% a lot of the times when I was doing what I do. So it's important to get the right GPU as well for what you're doing. And so that's why the 4070 Ti, even though it's got only 12 gigabytes of VRAM, I was really a lot of the times during this video, which is more on the intense side of things when it comes to video edits here at Tech Yes City, because it's got a lot of products and a lot of information. There's benchmark charts. There's a lot of stuff just getting thrown together in a video from all these different video files, as opposed to say just a vlog. That would be a bit easier to edit because it's just video files and then some overlay B-roll. So more of on the intense side, which I'm glad I got to do that and give you guys a better first impressions than just a regular vlog or something like that. So 4070 Ti not going to be a restricting factor in terms of checking out the differences here between the i9 and the 9950X. So overall, the 9950X, especially with the tune that we did here today, that 5.25 just all cores, static speed, and then the static voltage, I think that is the way to go. I look forward to actually trying something similar on the 8-core as well in the coming months and talking about that, because I believe that's the way to go for people who want the best response time. Now, with the 8-core, I may even be able to get higher speeds because we're only now dealing with the single CCD through the RHS, so we should be able to get better speeds overall. And so I'm looking forward to doing that and then tying that in with the 9950X, so 16-core versus 8-core, and then talking about that within the next video in the coming months. So there's gonna be a lot of experimenting going on around here, and I look forward to giving you guys the results and just talking about all the little nitty-gritties, because for me it's important, right? It's a lifestyle thing that affects my personal time. The more time I'm saving, the more time I'm making. It's just that simple. And so for me, it's SRSBIZ, guys, serious biz. And it actually is like serious biz, these kinds of things and saving time. So I hope you guys enjoyed today's video. If you have any thoughts and opinions on Ryzen 9000, do let us know in the description below. Love reading your thoughts and opinions as always. And with that aside, I'll catch you guys in another tech video very soon. Peace out for now. Bye.